The year is 1460. The ruler of Florence had sent his best monk to scour the land for ancient cryptic texts. What the monk brought back was above and beyond any expectations, almost as if the text wanted to be found and used. The 14 codices came out swinging with a description of what today might be compared to a full-blown DMT breakthrough, or a moment of spiritual epiphany so grand that it set the course for esoteric thought ever since. The manuscript read, "When my understanding was raised to a great height and my body was withdrawn into sleep, someone immensely great of infinite dimensions happened to call my name and spoke. I am Poimandres, the thinking mind of the Supreme, and I am with you everywhere. Hold in your mind all that you wish to learn, and I will teach you." He then changed in form, and all things opened up before me. I beheld a boundless view. All had become a gentle and joyous light before a downward moving darkness, fearful and loathsome, which I experienced as a twisting and enfolding motion appeared before me. I saw the nature of darkness change into a watery substance, which was indescribably shaken about and gave out a smoke as if from fire, culminating in an unutterable, mournful echo. There was sent forth from the watery substance a loud, inarticulate cry, as I thought. Out of this light came forth the word, which entered into the watery substance, and fire leapt from the substance and rose up, piercing and active away from the earth and water, which remained mingled together as one. They were kept in motion by the breath of the word, although they did not hear. Poimandres spoke. Have you understood the meaning of what you have seen? I shall come to know it, I said. Light is NOUS, the thinking mind, who was before the watery substance. That which sees and hears within you is the word of the Lord. The NOUS is the Father. They are not separate. Their union is life. Perceive the light and know it. Poimandres looked at me, and his form made me tremble, but I was intent on learning these things. That's when the word leapt forth from the downward moving elements to the pure work, and was united with the Creator NOUS, and the downward moving elements of creation were left behind, without the word, to be only matter alone. NOUS, the Creator, together with the word encompassing the spheres and spinning them round with a rushing motion, caused them to revolve with no fixed beginning, and an end with no limit, for it begins where it ends. The rotation of the spheres brought forth from the downward moving elements living beings without speech, for they did not contain the word. But NOUS brought forth man, as the same as himself, whom he loved as his own child. For man was very beautiful, bearing the image of his father, and he handed over to him all his creation. Man himself wished to create, and was given permission to do so by the Father, being begotten in the sphere of the Creator. Having acquired knowledge, he wished to break through the circumference of the spheres and come to know the power of him who was set in authority over the fire. Of all living beings on earth, man alone is double, mortal because of the body, immortal because of the real within. For although being immortal and having authority over all, he suffers mortal things which are subject to destiny. Although above the harmony of the cosmos, he has become a slave within it. Poimandres spoke. This is the mystery which has been kept secret until this day. For nature, united with man, has brought forth a wonder of wonders. Man was of the spirit and had the nature of the harmonies of the seven spheres. I asked, what after this, Poimandres? I desire to hear more. Be silent. I have not yet fully expounded what I have begun to say. Oh, damn. Okay. And told his ass. Indeed, I shall say nothing, said I. All things of the perceptible world remained so until the end of a cycle and the beginning of the ages. On completion of the cycle, the bond of all was loosed according to the will of God. May the man endowed with NOUS recognize that he is immortal, that desire is the cause of death, and he may come to know all
things that are. If you have understood, tell me.
Shaken, I replied, because the grim darkness is the first origin of one's own body, from which darkness arose the watery nature, from which darkness the body is formed in the sensory world, of which death drinks.
You have observed correctly. Mark your words. I, NOUS itself, come to the aid of the devout, the noble, the pure, merciful, and those who live piously, and my presence becomes a help. Straight away, they come to know all things.
Back in Florence, upon reading this, a chill ran down the spine of the ruler. He looked at the monk who had brought this corpus. He, recognizing this codex as older than that of Moses, immediately instructed his scholar to suspend his project of translating the dialogues of Plato so that he could now undertake this divine work. A work that went underground, kept alive and preserved by the Rosicrucians and Freemasons before emerging into the light of day to the public eye years later, becoming known to us as the Corpus Hermeticum, or the Dialogues of Hermes Trismegistus, a codex that makes one particular concept crystal clear, that the all is mind and the universe is mental. What you do with this revelation is up to you and yours alone. Just like any results, so are the repercussions. There is a saying, how you do one thing is how you do everything. For many, including myself, this translates to ability to focus. Our attentive longevity, to say words on a page, translates right on over to our capacity to aim our thoughts and retain focus on ideas, goals, and divine influence. Luckily, there are ways to sharpen our awareness of the subtle. We can work out our third eye, but first we need to know what we're looking at. The Holy Trinity has parallels in every religion. Different cultures in different places have different languages. The names have changed, but the story stays the same. The Hindu version is called the Trimurti, featuring one of the most mysteriously persevering personifications of all time, the Brahma. It is stated that everything we experience in human reality is Maya. Basically, the Brahma dreams just like we do, but on a macrocosmic scale. A dream of such large scale that entire realities exist within it, one of which is our universe. The implications of this notion are vast. If taken seriously, it means we are all not only deeply entangled, but made of one thing with no differentiating borders. It indicates that the observer is one and the same with the observed. Thus, consciousness is a universal law by which all material things are birthed and adhere. It also indicates that our universe is temporary, as any physical body. When the Brahma blinks his cosmic eye open, our world dissipates from being a real experience to only a memory, stored as information on a transaerial hard drive, often called the Akashic Records. A notion somehow both comforting and terrorizing. That is, if you believe it. The majority of people repudiate such a grand concept, assuming mythic tales are the product of ancient, outdated piety and faith-driven zeal. Understandable. But these same naysayers will put serious contemplation into a new hypothesis that's been gaining serious traction for some time now: simulation theory. A hypothesis that our reality is not the reality, and we live within a program designed by some otherworldly, possibly inconceivable beings. And they have good reason to think this way. Universal constants like gravitation and light speed indicate that the universe is fine-tuned. Quantum physics, like the double slit experiment and measurement problem, hints that we project reality. Code, seemingly written into our DNA and the fabric of space-time itself, seems deliberate. The famous Planck length reveals so-called pixels that make up our illusory world. The Fibonacci sequence found in all living things indicates a mathematical blueprint of design. The neurological structure of the brain itself has proven to be holographic in nature. Like the Brahma, each one of these examples were also once considered fundamentally irrational, and our prior axiom bears repeating. The names have changed, but the story stays the same. Different cultures describe things different ways. We live in a scientific culture, a bit of pattern recognition, and we see that the scientific notions put forward as evidence for simulation theory also describe attributes of the Brahma. But how could people this long ago have had knowledge this deep concerning the universe? They didn't have technology and education to measure such things, right? Wouldn't they need microscopes, spectrometers, and particle detectors to gain such existential insight? Well, Zen Master Dogen spoke wisdom that still haunts. He said, "Why study the ways of the universe when you can watch a pebble in a stream?" A quote suggesting that elaborate and expensive instrumentation is unnecessary to understand reality, suggesting an understanding. Could it be that these profound revelations can be unlocked by simply looking within? To answer that question, perhaps we should take example from Master Dogen and choose the middle path between the two. One, the concept of the Brahma, is so unfathomably ancient that we can't possibly know its source, much less the people who conceived it. So it's a bit abstract to us today. The other, simulation theory, is brand new, hence only in its infancy stage, making it fleeting and incomplete. But right in the middle of both, we find someone speaking our language. Thrice in his greatness of knowledge, wisdom, and piety is Hermes Trismegistus, formerly known as Jehudi in Egypt. Both names being rejected by my spell checker as I type this. How quickly we forget. Old Hermdog T is of course the father of the 7 Hermetic Principles, or Hermetics, the first of which is by no accident the one to kick off the list. Unlike the first 2 rules of Fight Club, it does not bear repeating, because all other principles, like our universal constants of science, or the Sanat Kumara of the Hindu Brahma, seem to fall in line as categorized fractals of this first main principle. You already know it by name: Mentalism. The all is mind. An axiom as heavy, complex, and hard to swallow as it is ridiculously simple. So simple that anyone anywhere can experience full-flooded gnosis just by realizing it. So simple that no instruction manual is needed in harnessing the law as a tool, an alchemical tool that should be used strictly for good. Foreshadowing. Service to others is a cornerstone to avoid backfire. So yeah, heads up. Finding out that separate religions differ only by the mouth noises used to describe the same things might not be a surprise. But to observe that modern science is doing the same is much harder to digest. But look at the name, modern science. When something is new enough that we are born into its existence, a focalizing bias takes place. We inherently identify with it because it surrounds our sphere of learning, molding it to our scope of conceptual grasp. In other words, it's new and it's ours. Thus, it must be above and beyond all other previous models. The result is clear. Modern science is held not only separate, but in opposition to all other dogmas, despite it being just one of many ways to explain reality. Its only attribute separate from the rest is, ironically, also its limitation. It claims that reality stops at physical matter. But Hermes Trismegistus III mastered his philosophy without these borders and categories. To him, science and religion were one and the same. Without those limitations, he was able to think outside the box, to create outside the cube, to exist outside the tesseract. If all these seemingly different ways of explaining the universe can be traced back to a single universal law that all reality hinges on, we can't help but wonder, is it all in my head? Or is my head all in my mind? So, quantum physics indicates that everything is potential until observed. Neuroscience indicates that our brain filters that down to become manageable. Psychology indicates that personal beliefs shape that reality according to what you want to experience, whether you want it or not. So whether or not an objective reality exists outside of us doesn't matter. Your mind creates your reality in every second. For example, the double slit experiment. It insists that the observer collapses the wave of potentiality into hard reality. This tells me that Carl was right about the subconscious mind. It makes decisions for us without our conscious consent. Until we painfully bring it up to eye level, it will continue doing so. And we will assume things are happening to us from the outside, because surely it is the powerful mind of the subconscious, our programming, that collapses the wave function, and not our lesser, fleeting thoughts. Now, if you ask Neil about the double slit experiment, he throws it under the bus, saying this.
This whole idea is the observer effect, where if you're not looking at it, you get one result, but if you look at it, you get another result. Then people over-interpreted that as though your consciousness is affecting the experiment. Here's what's going on. The light is coming from the bulb, reflecting off of you, entering my retina, going to my brain. But if you're an electron, I turn on the lights, the photon hits the electron jumps to a different state. I cannot know what the electron is doing unless I illuminate it, and if I illuminate it, it's doing something different from what it was before I illuminated it. It has nothing to do with consciousness. It has to do with interacting with the object in order to make a measurement.
However, if you ask Neil about the double slit experiment, he'll say this.
Double slit experiment on a whole new level, tracing its precise path, either through the right slit or the left slit. This is where the weird begins. I cannot explain to you what you're about to see. That's because no one on Earth understands it yet. If you can't live with that, then you're not going to be happy with what lies up ahead. On the smallest possible scale that we've ever discovered, the quantum universe, the mere act of observation changes reality. I know it sounds crazy, but in every trial ever conducted, the outcome depends on whether or not the experiment was observed.
Wow. Those are two different things. Thanks, Neil. It is easier to assume that mind is confined to the brain, restricted to the self. But if it isn't, a lot of the rules go out the window. For decades now, mothers of nonverbal children have claimed to share thoughts with them. They've been shy about it until recently, very recently, because they have been ignored by scientific professionals.
I knew that a lot of people would think, boy, Diane's gone off the deep end. But
That's the risk any scientist takes when they challenge the current paradigm. Even though I knew I was risking my scientific reputation.
I started testing them, and I found that they were exceedingly accurate.
What is the next number?
3.
After the medical board took my license away, I had to prove my sanity. And once I did, I said, I'm going to prove that ESP is real.
It is hypothesized that being nonverbal turns down the mental chatter of the brain that we all suffer from and opens up the mind to more subtle forces like the thoughts of others. The skeptics have said that this is simply a case of nonverbal communication owed to the closeness shared between the child and parent. Basically, that there are tells being performed undetected by the outside observers. It is also important to note that the skeptics who say this were not present, and neither were we. So, I mean, middle path, right? But perhaps we should remain skeptical of the skeptics when seeing footage like this.
3. Here we go. Oh, good. 8 and...
Now, I didn't see any trickery there, but then again, neither do I with David Blaine. But this is assuming that a house mom and an autistic child have the same career skill as David Blaine. But again, middle path. Seeing a person as nonverbal leads to a surface level assumption that they are not very clever. This is 1,000 miles from the truth. When given a new way to communicate, they pour out an unexpected deluge of insight and awareness. Many will even describe other worlds along with beings in surprisingly fine detail. Some reveal verbiage of poetic level rhetoric, but only when describing these elements of divinity. This reminds me quite a bit of savants, particularly ones who have no skills or abilities outside of one very specific thing, that at which they are impossibly good. And I mean impossibly good. For 1,000 years and to this day, we have accounts of people who can name the day of the week that falls on, June 17th of the year 1084. They will tell you the exact weekday name within or without the Gregorian calendar changes. Nobody gave them that info. And if it was given, that means that they memorized 1 million units of information. There are people who can calculate 14,672 divided by pi and answer it accurately down to the 100th decimal like a calculator, basically instantly, as if the information was just already there. In one of the wildest accounts, a boy could go into any parking lot and tell you the year, make, model, and history of each individual car. Before this ability was stumbled upon, he had no previous contact with those bits of intel. It's like they have AI installed at birth, somehow downloading information from a cosmic internet. But like North Korea, there's only one website available.
Going to the mall, so I'm sitting there eating a sandwich and I'm drawing, and this guy next to me says he's a physicist, and he goes, "It looks like you're doing some sort of math there." And I started telling him, my ideas. And he said, "It sounds to me like you're trying to describe space-time and limits and things that I didn't understand what he was talking about." He goes, "But you're doing it in layman terms, and I've never heard anybody try to do that before." It turns out it was integrals. What I was doing was integrals and calculus.
Do you think that these abilities were always in your brain and got somehow unlocked by the injury, or did the injury give you something new?
I 100% believe that we all have this in us. People think that I got hit in the head and just magically got good at math, but a lot of it is your brain gets damaged and you're forced to see the world differently, and by seeing the world differently, it makes you think differently.
We can learn so much from divergent minds.
I cannot even come close to hypotheticals as to why or how this is possible, but I can tell you one very important thing about these abilities. When the mind is laser focused on one particular thing, the downloads available on that very thing are sharp and accurate, to the point of superpower. On the contrary, though, a mind scattered by differing avenues is spread thin and overwhelmed by option paralysis, insipidly attempting to multitask. This tells us volumes about the potentials of meditation and visualization exercises. We're going to hit up some widely overlooked how-tos here in a few, but it also shows us that mind exists outside the body of a person or being. More accurately speaking, it is outside the being where mind typically occurs, or NOUSes. If you wish proof this kind of hive mind, take a look at insects. Cicadas emerge from the ground every so often, but their timing hinges on very complex mathematics based on primary numbers. Bet your left nut, not one of those little buggers is nousing those equations on their own. Ants in a colony also think as one unit, paying no attention to its own particular body. Could it be that a person with autism is closer to the causal realms due to differences in brain chemistry that make them less distracted by the survival mode of tangible human biology? This trait is certainly shared by experienced meditators who had to work for their gift of insight, and Zen masters who have the same abilities. After all three of these groups have one definite trait in common. They are all people of few words. I guess that's gonna go ahead and exclude me from that group. I be yapping. Perhaps Terence McKenna was right, that language shapes our reality, but are we weighed down by our own language? Does it inhibit us? If you have ever been dating a person who, after a while, insists that you answer the question, "What are we?" you might know how frustrating it can be to categorize everything according to social norms created by language. Perhaps the native people of indigenous cultures were right when they told Carl that they think from the heart, and that thinking with the brain organ designed for sensing was childishly naive. I mean, it is widely accepted now that we have neurological triggers in both gut and heart. So we have 3 brains, but 1 mind? Hard to tell what to make of this, especially because I am depending on language to say it. That's why I put these symbols up here all the time, in case you were wondering. Perhaps we can find a person with these abilities who is not shy of words. A person who is modern, yet carries verified validation of his extraordinary mental abilities. Let me introduce you to an untold side of Ingo Swann.
Here was one day when I was trying to see what this target was, and I drew this here, and I said, this is letters of some kind, and it may be Arabic letters. This turned out to be a very important experiment, because here was the target tray. Didn't get this, didn't get that, and I thought it didn't get that either. When Dr. Osis saw the result, he came running downstairs from his office. He says, you got it, you got it. Just turn your response upside down, and there it is. Well, this came as a complete shock to me, because I did not do this consciously. This was pre-conscious processes, and this was coming from some autonomic response inside of me, completely bypassing consciousness stuff. And this was the first time I realized this must be part of our species inheritance. And the implication was that we all have this capability somewhere in us. Our minds can be conditioned to become different, as we all know that. But our inner systems that are doing perception at some other level beneath our consciousness must be there.
The reason I say introduce you to is because everyone knows of his remote viewing by now, but few have read his unique views on consciousness itself. To me, seeing someone who can harness these extraordinary abilities while staying in his logical functioning mind permits a deeper dive into his own philosophies, going a bit further than the sensational documentaries based on his work of remote viewing Mars for the CIA, which will have to be its own episode. Coming soon, by the way. In his book, Reality Boxes, he writes, with respect to language research, it is easy enough to identify the different languages to the innate language module in the motherboard of human consciousness. The problem is that language researchers cannot yet find the language program itself, which is apparently installed in the seat of consciousness, not locatable so far. The Tuareg people of Africa in the Great Sahara Desert have some 12 different kinds of winds and many kinds of sand. They have assigned names and working frames of reference for them, for which there are no equivalents in English. Eskimo cultures have taken the measure of at least 17 different kinds of snow and their implications. In cultures dependent on camels, an extensive list of camel attitudes has long been available. Those lumpy-ass loogie ponies are very sassy. Of the Polynesian islanders, many different kinds of ocean waves. In ancient India, yoga texts identify dozens of different aspects or types of mind and of consciousness via Sanskrit terms for which there are no equivalents in English. So it's impossible to really discuss those types. This author, Swann, can identify at least 10 different types of telepathy. So along with wind just being wind, camels just being camels, telepathy is just telepathy. Merely labeling manifold kinds of telepathy as just telepathy does not enable needed distinctions of the many kinds of it, and neither does labeling consciousness as just consciousness. If human consciousness is being mentally conscious or aware of anything, then consciousness per se is not amendable to having its measure taken, the implication being that it is not only endless but also infinite. Thought transference, dubbed telepathy, was attributed to the strange. The reason was that it transcended the laws of physical matter, as those laws were understood. Since this understanding was generated within an alpha reality box, insisting that matter was the only reality, telepathic experiencing could be ejected from any consideration. The strategy did not prevent telepathic experiencing from happening, of course, especially the vivid, well-documented kind via which mothers could sense when their children were in danger. What is not completely understood is that in the transferring of the information, bits are often sent through a series of subconscious processing, the principal function of which is to decode information bits so that they can be related to whatever is stored in memory banks. It seems that information theorists sorted out our sensing systems receive an astronomical 11 million information bits per second. Only an incredibly small, repeat, incredibly small fraction of those bits manage to get through to the neocortex and trigger conscious awareness and perception. Immanuel Kant proposed that ideas and how they are understood stand between reality and any understanding of it. For clarity, reality exists of which the mind makes whatever reality box ideas it can. The knowing is composed. As John Locke indicated, the knowing mind assumes it knows, but ideas absolutely have to be based in some kind of frame of reference. What this means to involved researchers is that consciousness eludes efforts of the brain imagers to corral it. This inspires some researchers boldly to argue that the seat of consciousness itself is not in the brain. Nevertheless, there's a global brain state that's constantly in flux. There exists an interesting saying: if you ask a fish to describe its environment, it will point out everything but the water. Yet another, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. It could also be said that you can lead specimens of the human species to their collective bigger picture, but all they'll see is the particular edge on which they are standing. All specimens of the human species have awareness, but they are so commonly and redundantly present that, like the fish's water, they are not seen. It can be stipulated that there are different kinds or types of awareness via which different things become revealed, and so it can justifiably be thought that a veritable or virtual motherboard ocean of awareness does exist, but which, like the proverbial water, flows in different ways and different patterns. Thus, it can be stipulated that there are different kinds or types of awareness via which different things become revealed, and so it can justifiably be thought that a veritable or virtual or motherboard ocean of awareness does exist, but which, like the proverbial water, flows in different ways and different patterns. So, despite consciousness or mind being elusive to measure, we can understand at least minutely, how bits of information are picked up by our sense receptors to be filtered through our subconscious. The subconscious then regurgitates some of that information up to our waking or thinking brain in a way that we can understand, making it clear that what we think we know is molded by whatever the subconscious is previously set up for. This is devastating to our notion of free will. Until, of course, we go back to that advice given by Uncle Carl. Until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate. Our thoughts, words, actions, and thus resulting lives are at the mercy of this programming, living so deep within us that we can't see it, outside of fleeting dreams and knee-jerk reactions. It is the water to our inner fish, begging the question, how do we actually, manually, go about digging up this elusive, deeper mind enough to get a good look at it? And when we finally do, what procedure should be done to harness it and configure it to better work for us and our higher needs? Even though this process will path differently to each person, there are a few surefire how-tos. Let's dive in. The Buddha, the Siddhartha one, once said, all that we are is defined by our thoughts. It begins where our thoughts begin, it moves where our thoughts move, and it rests where our thoughts rest. Just like we are the result of Source, our life is the result of the Source within. All right, enough discourse. Step one is simple. Shut the f*** up. Seriously. It is often assumed that meditation's purpose is for the brain to rest from acrobatic thinking, because that's absolutely true. It is like fasting for neurons. But more importantly, when the conscious mind empties out, even for a moment, it allows room for that pesky old subconscious to boil up into your coherent cognition, thus making the unconscious conscious. Now, we want a direct flow between the upper and the lower, the thinking mind and the programmed mind. So let's take a look at another Hermetic axiom, that of correspondence. We want to make that flow direct and straight, an unbroken circuit between the below and the above. In this case, your spine, and the causality of the subtle will follow suit. Hey, the tailbone's connected to the pine bone, so to speak. We'll put some anatomy up there. If you have ever wondered why we are told to have our backs straight, level, and plumb while in meditation, well, it's not just about tradition. We are electrical by nature, and the juice is carried by fluids, namely cerebral spinal fluid. We want a straight shot with no resistance between our sacrum, the heat and energy source, to the top where the magic is fitting to happen. Try having your back against a wall at first until you capture this posture. The key is to become perfectly straight. And don't worry, you can still do this while being super gay. Actually, it might be better off. There is a torus shape of electromagnetic energy surrounding you. You can sense this field particularly well when not distracted. To be able to sense it also means to imagine it. Sounds like woo-woo, but this is a two-way street. Like placebo, at least, we are projecting as much as we are taking in. When your back is straightened out, paving the way for a cerebral cocktail highway, the energy finds its way easier. Thus, you can easier imagine the center of that torus as a straight line running through your core. Having this image stapled to your focus is like inviting and insights and revelations into your E-field. This is assuming that you've cleared the mind of all the clutter. This is the difficult part. Difficult because of intrusive thoughts, of course. They sneak in uninvited. So we might call upon a third Hermetic principle, that of polarity, opposites. When a particularly unpleasant thought creeps in, don't even bother trying to get rid of it. Blocking non-tangible things with a brick wall is absolutely futile. The etheric is emergent by nature, magnetic to equivalent frequencies, beyond any barriers. So lean in. Strategically embrace the negativity with its opposite. Get a good look at the qualities and personality of the intrusive thought and trace a line from it to its direct opposite. This is easy and simple, but not to be confused with replacement, like mentally sitting on a beach in the sun. If you want to do that, just go find a beach. What I mean here is to find the specific antithesis of the intrusive thought with a straight line that can go on boundlessly in a parallel yet opposing direction. This is easier than replacing the thought because it gives us a handle to grasp onto. Doing this is like push-ups for the mind. That muscle gets stronger with practice until eventually it is a habit that is done without effort. This repetitious action of non-action is precisely how we reprogram the knee-jerk reactions of the subconscious until we are finally capable of clearing the mind of any and all thoughts, or as the Buddhists would say, to empty your cup. Clearing the mind of stagnating, redundant ruts of thought cycles is key. There are many ways to do this. Some people use a repeated mantra or focus on their own breathing and bodily sensations. Some hit the cheat code and trick their own brain up by asking, "I wonder what my next thought will be." This triggers a gap to emerge between thought loops. You might even do something as flat simple as a countdown to no thoughts. Literally, like 3, 2, 1, no thoughts starting now. And then hold on to that, gently as long as possible, as long as you can, until they, thoughts come tumbling back in. It's different for everyone, but the main goal is to recognize when the thinking mind starts back up, catch it and recognize it happening, and then gently shepherd your mind back to whatever practice happens to be working for you. There is a reason that old JC said to his apostles, "Take no thought." You'll notice he didn't say, "Have no thought." He knew that thoughts are not generated by the brain, but instead are downloaded into it. It's like floodgates. Too much and we have thought option paralysis. When we take no thoughts, we are clearing out the garage completely. Put it all in the yard. Before bringing the bicycles and kayaks that they wanted so bad but never used back in, one at a time, thus reorganizing it properly. When it's reorganized properly, we can focus properly. And maybe we should consider selling the kayaks. It takes up a quarter of the garage, Jacinda, and I want to set up my drum kit so it can attempt foot rudiments performed by the greatest drummer who has ever lived, whose identity is obvious to anyone with ears to hear. All right. I like the thing, but I can play drums though. There's no room in here. Key word coming in hot here is focus. This is the most important part. Maintaining a laser focus on one particular idea. As simple as it sounds, our greatest weakness in developing mental superpowers is being pulled in a million directions by a million thoughts. Multitasking is an illusion. We shouldn't expect our minds to do it any more than we can. This is the difference between peppering somebody with buckshot from a shotgun and putting a single bullet into someone's forehead. Terrible example, but the aim here is to execute a goal, right? So a little wordplay won't hurt. The shotgun works fine when we're in the dark. when we can't see what we want to. We shoot in a vague direction, grazing our target, but also the lava lamp, and now we have a mess. A bullet is refined and condensed. It requires a sharp eye that sees clearly. It gets the job done thoroughly without the collateral damage. This is what we should aim for. My Canadian friend Zoe sent me an old book called The Finding of the Third Eye. And just like many old books concerning the esoteric, it aged well in illustrating this point. When the third eye is opened, the individual begins to see all the manifold creatures and activities of the ether, and he approaches much nearer to the causes and realities of life. The mind can have power over everything which it can visualize. He sees exactly what his thoughts are and what happens to them. Once he has thoroughly comprehended the region of thought, he uses and controls his thinking apparatus to much greater purpose. The yogi or sage who wishes to know truth at first hand and to study the workings of the universe sets himself earnestly and patiently to reawaken his third eye into activity, using time-worn and tested methods. Truth is the essence of purity, and therefore, as the sage knows, can only be contacted by one of a like vibration. He next works to bring the brain under the complete subjection of his will instead of at the mercy of outside influences. I know I'm reading another book right now, but I didn't forget about you. You'll be all right, buddy. Quit it. Gravity. By a series of carefully planned exercises, he trains his mental equipment in much the same way as a dancer trains her muscles. The dancer gains complete control of her body at the cost of tremendous work and sacrifice. The sage, for about the same cost of effort, gains complete control of the mind. The mind is a very powerful instrument. It can be compared with material of electrical constituency, which has, if concentrated to one point, the same burning quality as fire. If a mind is divided upon several thoughts, its burning force is dispersed in various directions. If concentrated upon one single point, it becomes as burning glass to the sun. Man is a god in the making, and the goal is waiting before him. When once he has set his feet firmly upon the path of attainment, his earnest aspirations will burn the dross out of his body and mind. Then, by degrees of the centers of force located within his 7 major glands, he will be enabled to function. These sensors connect him with the knowledge of and power to consciously work in the different planes of matter. Man's whole mentality can by this means be reoriented and changed from a limited perception of third-dimensional objective life to a broad understanding concerning the why and wherefore of the universe and his own part in the scheme of things. He achieves a telepathic union with the mind of the being whose body is this solar system, sometimes spoken of as cosmic consciousness. The science of self-development along these lines usually includes special dieting, fasting, breathing, and posture. But the principal aspect of this training is known as meditation. The actual man himself, his real personality, and all of him that will endure, dwells within the heart. All that man learns through training and combining his physical brain with his higher mind must be linked with his heart before it really is his. Christ said, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And where a man's heart is, there will his treasure also be." This should remind us of the center of our electromagnetic torus field that we were speaking about. We can gather that Jesus Christ taught his disciples the science of meditation. Often he took them apart into a high place or plane. We read that one of them even reached the 3rd heaven and learned there of things which no man is allowed to tell. The Buddha sat in meditation for years until he gained access to the universal knowledge. Such great spirits have done much of the preliminary work for us and have shared with us their knowledge. So all we need to do is to profit by it. It is not necessary for all of us to travel the occult path, to study deeply, and to train as mystics. It is never too early or too late for any of us to take the quickest way, to begin to learn to love, to clear out all the accumulated rubbish of false thinking, intolerance, and greed, which is robbing us of the light of life. He will, through opening his heart in love, establish a direct link with the great plan, the joy of which superconscious knowledge will uphold him through all experience. It will illuminate his path through life, investing sorrows and joys with the radiance of their inner message. Stone walls do not a prison make, nor do palaces make a paradise. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a hell out of a heaven, or a heaven out of a hell. The first step to mastery is, therefore, to put the mind in order, to train it to work clearly and dispassionately, and to establish a true perspective on life. We must clear out from our minds quite mercilessly all the accumulated rubbish, so that we will have a clean, free field in which to develop the marvelous latent powers which are our heritage. The effects of people's emanations upon flowers, animals, and children is often very noticeable, each their chemical form and action. It is obviously impossible for doctors or teachers to do us any permanent good until we learn not to poison ourselves and those around us. The true spiritual qualities entirely eliminate these poisons. Absolute faith makes fear and worry an impossibility. One who is able to live in this way needs no outside help and sheds warmth and radiance on all around him. The yogi discards all possessions and tries to discover the minimum needs for physical existence. This should remind us of the Poimandres' main message to Hermes in our intro today. The next step is to study our own processes of thought. We will soon discover that we are usually thinking of 100 different things at once. It would be impossible for several shorthand typists to capture all the thoughts which jostle one another through our brains in the space of even a few moments. This shows that we divide the power of our minds up into about 100 parts, giving only a small portion of it to any one thing. Therefore, we do most things with a tiny percentage of our actual capacity, which usually remains forever unknown. Once having eliminated all unnecessaries from our minds, we can give undivided attention to anything we do. The completely undivided attention of the mind is all-powerful, omnipotent, and a force that can burn through everything and bend everything to its command. If the all is mind, then we are surrounded by invisible intelligence, always and deliberately morphing us and our world, making creation and evolution just two words for the same thing. What is this intention that lies just beyond the wall of sleep that begs our attention so cautiously yet also urgently? This divine spark that makes man more than just an organism in its environment is debated against with great heat, despite being self-evident. Why? We have to remember that the rules of reality were written by man, in the language of man, thus can be turned on its head at any point. Best illustrated in A World Split Apart. If the world has not reached its end, it has reached a major watershed in history, equal in importance from the turn from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance. It will demand from us a spiritual blaze. We'll have to rise to a new height of vision where our physical nature won't be cursed as in the Middle Ages, but our spiritual being won't be trampled on as in the modern era. This ascension is similar to climbing onto the next anthropological stage. No one on earth has any other way but upward. There is a book that I am sure you're familiar with, or at least heard of, called the Kybalion. You may have also heard the arguments against it. Comment section experts are quick to point out that it is a modern text and not a true, authentic, cryptic manuscript written by the hand of some divinely begotten ancient sages endowed with ancient wisdom. Calm down, Pythagoras. You're technically right, but also missing the point entirely. We have made clear that language shapes how we see reality. This makes clear the importance of clearing out that very clutter before making room for divine inspiration. The original Hermetica is truly cryptic and anciently authentic. Great. It was written a bazillion years ago. Neato burrito. But it's not quite speaking our language anymore. For real, no caps. Its Riz is straight time worn. This is so stupid. Understanding it takes the kind of focus and insight that comes from first stepping one foot in the door. This is where books like the Kybalion come in to make for a great appetizer, prepping the mind's comprehensive patterning to actually absorb the mystical qualities that may otherwise fly over our heads. This is why I have always said not to read Carl Jung's Red Book until after digesting his lighter and easier Man and His Symbols first. Once the latter is comprehended, the abstraction of thought forms produced by his Red Book will now have an easier way into the old pineal bean. Unfortunately, too much understanding of the Red Book can lead to existential terror. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? That part's not relevant, but a warning as such is at least polite. The Kybalion states that the all creates the universe mentally, in a manner akin to the process whereby man creates mental images. This helps us make sense of the terms used in the more cryptic Hermetica. For example, the name Poimandres itself is a Greek adaptation of a prior Egyptian word, meaning mind of authority. The term nous is not exactly parallel to our word mind either, and is a bit more of a verbiage for the activity performed by the mind's thinking and action. The term nous is not exactly parallel to our word mind either, and is a bit more of a verbiage for the activity performed by the mind's thinking and action. This is the part to be harnessed, as pure mind itself, of course, has no feedback to reflect on. The Kybalion makes it clear that mind is the indispensable condition of existence. It is just already there first, and everything else is merely a form birthed from it. This helps us to better understand the Hindu concept of living within the dream of the Brahma. It is both parabolic and literal simultaneously. Ryan Topping, whose last name is Topping, illustrates this beautifully. Form is an old word, but one worth remembering. Imagine two planks of oak cut from the same tree. A carpenter leaves behind one slab of wood and begins to work on another. An hour later, the second plank has become a table. What changed? In their chemistry, the two slabs remain identical. That is to say, in their nature, nothing changed. From the point of view of chemistry, the two things remain one thing. And yet, this is only one rather limited point of view. From every other point of view, what altered is the wood's shape or form. The names we give to things identify these differences between things. This Alchemy is exactly what your mind does with reality. As the Buddhists say, everything is clay, and it is up to you to form it into something useful like a cup. Useful, due only to its emptiness. The mind, like any tool, can be used well or badly. You can use a hammer to build a shed, or you can beat yourself in the face with it. This is why we shouldn't forget our left brain logic in this equation. Sure, of course, we shouldn't let it weigh us down by carrying it on our backs during our practice, but similarly, logic governs how the mind grasps truth. It's wired into us as much as it is programmed into the fabric of the universe. This logic is discernment between good and bad, truth and falsity, authenticity and bullshit. When we witness the savants and other people on the spectrum of neurodivergence, all of the above is made surprisingly clear. These are the most authentic people, many of which incapable of lying and deceit. Studies have shown that they just don't feel the body in the same way that we do. They don't process millions of scattered variables like we do. This is what makes them laser focused on one particular ability while simultaneously disabled in all other departments, something that neurotypicals can only achieve if put to practice. Whether the accounts put forward in the telepathy tapes are so-called real or not doesn't matter in the light of the message to be learned from these, frankly, gifted individuals. Like the teachings of Jesus Christ, forcing ourselves to decide whether or not he actually existed as a man or as an archetypal figure formed by the collective thoughts of man is not only irrelevant, but will quickly escape the point of focus from our learning mind, consciously or not. When we connect the dots between all of the above subjects concerning mind, Poimandres in the Hermetica, Ingo Swann's reality boxes, the Kybalion, the old school rhetoric of Adler's finding of the third eye, and the teachings of Jesus, the Buddha, and all other sages of antiquity, and of course, the mental processing of neurodivergence, autistic or savant. They all share one backbone spine, creating a straight line traced throughout all the various fractals that this subject of mind has to teach. That backbone is the authenticity of love, the love for oneself and the love for another, knowing that those two things are actually one thing. It is the loving honesty that it takes for one's own self to face the inner turmoil reflected off the external world of chaos that creates these intrusive thoughts. Those thoughts have a purpose. Those thoughts have a purpose other than just ruining your Florida vacation. They are meant to be alchemically transmuted for a cleaner and clearer vision of reality. And it is as difficult as it is simple. The effort, self-discipline, and self-acceptance it takes to repeatedly exercise this most important muscle that is the mind is no light task. But a sculptor finds ultimate form, not by adding to his statue, but by chiseling away its extra. And that is what takes backbone. That is what takes some spine.
Hate and lynch, and it change how you perceive. Unbiasedly, all the bullshit they try to make you believe.